Hello, and welcome to episode 9 of the Midwest Gaming Classic podcast. I'm your host, Jason Garris, panel director of the Midwest Gaming Classic. After several years being apart as co-workers at Gottlieb, Jeff Lee and Tom Malinowski are together again to discuss the development and history of the very rare Gottlieb arcade game, Argus. Near the end of the panel, special guest David Theil talks about how he created the sound design for the game. Galloping Ghost arcade owner Doc Mac also makes a brief appearance, as he's the one who resurrected this unreleased arcade game that can exclusively be played at his arcade in Brookfield, Illinois. This was the 500th game to be added to the Galloping Ghost arcade floor on March 12, 2016, which was 1 month prior of its appearance at the panel you were about to watch. After the panel, stick around for about 10 minutes of Argus gameplay so you can actually see and hear this game perhaps for the very first time. Enough of me talking, let's get to the panel.
I'm very lucky that a few years ago I was put in touch with Jeff Lee, who is the creator of Q*bert. And he has a ton of Gottlieb history and people that worked with him at Gottlieb that want to share that history. And this year he came to me and he had said, Dan, we'd love to put together a panel about the making of Argus, which is an unreleased game from Gottlieb that I worked on. And our response, of course, was, that sounds cool. And then it sounded even cooler when he told us that Doc from Galloping Ghost Arcade was going to bring the first functioning prototype of this game that they had remade that would be going public shortly after the Midwest Gaming Classic to the show to show during their speech. So this remade classic would be there, as well as both Jeff and Tom, two of the main creators for this game, to be able to talk about its history. So in this panel, you'll see them talk about that history of making this extremely rare arcade game, and you'll get to see the game in action for one of the first times.
I'm Jeff Lee. I was an artist at Gottlieb back in the 80s, and last year got in contact with my old colleague, Tom Malinowski here, who was a programmer at that same time. And the game you're seeing here, Argus, was Tom's first project at Gottlieb and my second project, but the first one utilizing our full-blown graphics board. And at the time, we hadn't seen each other in many years. We met at the Wizard World Comic-Con, and at that time, I was there a guest of Doc Mac of the Galloping Ghost Arcade, and we discussed the possibility of resurrecting Argus. And so it has come to pass. Doc and his team scavenged a bunch of parts, and I made some new art. We had to call in some old hands to help us out with some of the issues that we had. And not everything is solved with this. There's still little problems with the soundboard. But it's all coming along. So Tom is going to step up and has a little presentation to show us of the resurrection here and the history of the game. Hello. So Tom?
Okay, well, as Jeff said, I'm a longtime arcade game designer, programmer, and amateur historian. So I'm going to give you a bit of a history lesson here that is really my history lesson. And since I'm up here like an old style preacher, let's start with a verse from the history of computers. In the beginning, man created an act. If any of you have seen the recent movie Imitation Game, it was about Alan Turing, who was like the world's first digital programmer. And he took the extremely primitive electronics and created a computer out of it, and with that he broke the almost unbreakable code that the Germans used to transmit messages to all their ships and troops and such. That movie kind of covered two of my favorite subjects. One, of course, being computers, and the other being, the history of World War II. By the end of the 40s, that's what a modern computer looked like a scene from Dr. Frankenstein's lab. Pretty frightening, but the era that you all, I assume, like the electronics of today, started in a room like that long before any of us were born, I think. But anyways, to continue with my history lesson on this thing here, does any of you have a memory like this where you were sitting around listening to a console radio, to shows, shows like the Shadow? I don't, but if any of you do, you're way older than me. But this used to be family entertainment. I think for me and almost everyone, certainly Jeff qualifies, I think I was the first generation to be raised on television. That's what television was like in the 50s. I remember something a little bit more modern than that, but that was our era. And everybody in this room has lived and died on television, but more to the point. Does anyone remember a time when there was no home computers?
I do.
He does. Anyone else? Hard to believe you have home computers. When I was 20 years old, this was the modern home computer. The one on the left is IBM $1 million computer that only rich corporations could buy. And if you were a little bit rich, a $1 million corporation could afford a 200,000 portable computer. On the left, this is a DEC PDP-11. Needless to say, no middle-class person owned either one of these. Home computers did not exist when I was 20 years old. So, because of the space program, although it never made it there, geniuses of that era created the first microcomputer. And this is one of them. This is the 8088. There was a Z80, 6502, and later on the 8088, which is in the Argus itself. But that's the first chip. It's not much bigger than like 4 postage stamps. And even now they're even smaller than that. But that was created like around 1975. And just as a point of reference, the people that worked at these computers at that time thought this was a toy. And when we, being one of the first to work on this toy, we were kind of like put down, like we're playing with some kind of toy, a toy which has now spawned this entire convention here. And that, as I said, they thought that was just a joke, really a joke. But I had a dear friend, and he saw this very ad of Popular Electronics in '75, that you could build your own computer. What a concept. It was a kit, cost about $1,000, came completely disassembled, and he amazingly paid $1,000 because he wanted to be the first person on the block with a home computer, a concept that you all take for granted today. And so he had to solder every chip, resistor, wire, switch in this thing, and as you can see, unlike all your technology today, this thing was pretty immensely complicated, and it didn't really do much. But lo and behold, he did it successfully, and that's an important point. He had to do it very successfully. And lo and behold, you have your very first home computer in 1975. Cool as it is, it did not have a graphics, so you couldn't do an arcade game on it. Didn't have a text screen, didn't have a keyboard, it had no screen at all. It had that, switches and LEDs. And incidentally, that's where I learned to program. This is all you had. You had to enter in you had to convert the code for the 8080, that's what it was, to a binary code, to a hex code, and then down into, hex then binary, backwards on that. Flip in the binary code on the switches and store it, 3-part code, And then slowly you would get a program that would maybe read the switches, read the LEDs, and later on you'd write a keyboard routine and a text screen. There was no graphics back then. So that's where it all began for me. And many people took this very simple chip and created the first arcade game, which we are now worshiping 40 years later. Pong was one of the first arcade games we put a quarter in and got to play with pals. It's amazingly simple. One other electronic guru of that time went off and took that same chip and created this. This is a chess challenger. It was the world's first portable artificial intelligence game. It actually could play a decent game of chess, and now it probably could beat almost anyone, but back then it could beat anyone who knew how to play chess fairly well. But it played a pretty decent game of chess. You entered in your move here, and then it would think about it and come back with a move there. So you could, and it could play itself too. So that was some of the earliest things that these toys were being used for. And a little bit more on fidelity in a minute. And of course, the other people came along with the early days of arcades, the first vector graphics, asteroids. Black and white though it was a VGA game, the Space Invaders, and of course the classic character and highly successful game of Pac-Man all came along, all because of that, quote, toy computer. Ready? And now, my career began once again with Fidelity Electronics. They hired me because I had to switch in that code way back in '75. This was back in '78 to do a sequel game to their chess challenger. It was called the Bridge Challenger. I don't know if anyone knows how to play the card game of bridge, but if you do, one problem with bridge, of course, is you have to have 4 people, not 3, not 5, not 2. So if you want to play a game of bridge with humans, you need 4 dedicated bridge players. So what we were providing here was an ability to substitute 1, 2, 3, even all 4 of the bridge players to watch the game play with itself and play the card game of bridge. And again, it's an artificial intelligence game. We had one of the earliest optical scanners in the world, and the cards that we had scan bars, and you would scan them in, so that's how the computer knew what cards it had. And then we would bid it and play it, and that's how you would play the game of bridge. But again, it's pretty primitive gaming. But by 1981, the arcade business was big. Arcades were as big as I am. This is Galloping Ghost today, but I had to help my benefactor. But
It's getting bigger than that.
no, yeah, that's true. Our Galloping Ghost is today the biggest arcade probably ever. But there were in the '81 arcades almost as big, and they did look sort of like that. And of course, the more classic Centipedes came along, and finally an American hit, Defender. These were the games that were coming around in '81. And a company called Gottlieb, which was well known for their pinballs, decided, hey, we wanted to get into this lucrative market that was happening in '81. And initially, the team didn't know how to do it. They didn't have a video game division, so they went off to Japan and licensed this one on New York. And Doc, you knew the other game. What was the other game? I couldn't find it on the internet. Don't remember it. Juno First, yeah. Those were just 2 Japanese licensed games, and they were okay. And I don't think they were as big a hit as anything that was going on. But fortunately, they also had they hired a dynamic new team. I don't have any pictures of them, but their names were Howie Rubin and Ron Waxman. And by the way, this is Bensonville, where a lot of miracles from Gottlieb came from. A little bit Photoshop. They didn't have a neat sign like that, but that is the actual building. But anyways, they leased this location and decided, okay, we're going to actually make in-house video games. And they hired a complete staff of people. I mean, there's young me. They hired Jeff, Ben, Dave Dave was on the Skype, I see, and many others. And none of us had done video games. Even my experience, as you can see, was in standalone artificial intelligence, simple games. And videos is another level different. So they hired this. This is Tim Scully. He was the only one who had actually been in the arcade industry, I think, since '79 or '78, thereabouts. So he was a veteran, and he was going to do their first game, which ultimately became Reactor. And he was going to teach all us newbies. Everyone was there and had never done a video game. So he was supposed to be a mentor to us, and he was also going to provide the first product for Gottlieb. And so that's where it all began. So, first employee meeting. I want to ask you, I had this nicely phrased, what do you do when Ron Waxman, that's a drawing that Jeff did of Ron Waxman at the time, comes up to you and say, okay, we want you to do an original idea for a new arcade game. What do you do? Do you hide, run, or start sending out resumes? Or, and that's pretty much how I thought at the time, think of a scene from a recent movie that you saw. The last 20 minutes was so cool. I said, okay, a game in which a superhero has to save humanity from supervillains. And that game was, that movie was Superman 2. So now we have a game idea, and I don't believe this is your drawing, right? This is Frank. So yeah, Jeff is a Frank Shark.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I don't know. I thought that was your drawing, but
No, I don't even. Artistry has never been one of my things, so I didn't know it was Frank or you, and I don't think you're that.
Wasn't one of our managers, and Frank Starshack probably.
Yeah, I think so. I think obviously Jeff is a way better artist as you're about to see. But anyways, yeah, this was our first meeting, and like I say, I was blessed to be with a very creative team, even though they had never done a video game before, of Dave and Jeff here, and we just knocked ideas out based on that simple premise of, okay, let's bring Superman to an arcade. So most of the concepts were there, and so many ideas, and we just wrote them down. And
the drawback was that our company was not able to get the license for Superman, or was not willing to pay for that license.
Yep. Well, we'll get into licensing a little bit later. But, all right, so up here, what were we going to call this new game? Well, we thought about Video Man, but it wasn't likely. Protector, well, I don't know why, but it was no. For a long time, it was known as Guardian. But when there was a... Right.
It was late for that, actually. It actually was Guardian for quite a while, even when it eventually went out on test. Here's the a screen marquee that was made up. Going to here, and that's how it was when it went out on test on several occasions.
So Guardian was almost the name it was going to be called, but I forget why we changed it again. But the winner, as you can clearly see on the original game and otherwise, was Argus. So over the course of the next year, the team of everyone that was involved and myself, we finally went forward and created a complete video game. The graphics in it, I think for 1982 when it came out, was superior to anything that was out there. I mean, this was actually the first scene that Jeff drew up. And it had a little bit of a Chicago flavor. You can see it's no longer called the Standard Oil building, but it was at the time. And I'm not sure where the rest of his ideas, but this was all Jeff's ideas, and it was a good starting screen.
Well, we were very limited. We had, I think, 128 background characters. That's 8 by 8 pixels. So I kind of had to reuse a lot of them. So you see that in the design of these buildings. You see that in the design of the trees. We spent a lot extra actually on that statue in the middle because it was not reused anywhere else.
Okay. But in addition to that, of course, we did 6 amazing graphical scenes, and at least 20 unique characters, if not more. Yeah, I was inspired because we were launching the space shuttle, and I had been there for the lunar landings. That's what inspired those seats, and an urban and a bridge, and
I was able to reuse some of the mountain scenery just by changing the color, you know.
One of the things that I didn't remember from long ago is we have this tractor that cleans the rubble that falls from the villains, and that's all it does, is it just cleans the rubble just for sanitary sake. And when I saw the game, you can't really see it in this picture, I realized that Jeff had had the foresight, this is how into the game he was, to change the construction worker to an astronaut constructor worker. Little details that you failed to miss. I mean, this is why the team that I was working with was just amazing.
You're welcome, honey, anytime.
So you asked, having done all this work for a year, how well did Argus do in test? And the answer is, it did not produce enough of these.
Yeah, and that was the kiss of death back in the day, because the model for arcade was how much money did a game collect, and if it didn't collect enough, they couldn't justify manufacturing it and sticking it to the distributors and operators. So Argus never saw any production.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, as I say, not enough higher quarter count, there's no purchase orders in that. But nevertheless, I just want to say that everybody was, they did a phenomenal amount of work on this game, and it was truly a disappointment. You may ask how I took it when Argus didn't succeed. Well, as the British say, with a stiff upper lip. I took it well. I mean, naturally, I was ready to move on to the next thing and all that. But nevertheless, these guys worked their tail off for the game, and fortunately, they were rewarded with Gottlieb's major success, Qbert. Jeff and Dave, the sound effects that they brought to Argus, and it's as good as Qbert, obviously. And Dave's use of the Voltrex on Qbert and that, and other sound effects for the game, and your artwork. I mean, at least these two, under Warren Davis' programming skills, produced our first hit at Milestar, and showing that they clearly had the talents there. So let's go on with the rest of the story. Columbia owned Gottlieb, and I guess they felt that Gottlieb was just an old pinball company, so it was time to get a new name, and so they came up with this new name called Milestar, and mostly I think because they liked the cool star on the M and such, but other than that, I don't know why, Gottlieb had been around for 60 years.
No one knew where that name came from or who was responsible for it.
Yeah, just a cool marketing mood. They said, hey, we could put a star on top of the M, and that was good. So we had other things. Okay, so as disappointing as Argus was to me, even Tim Skelly's reactor didn't test well either, but at least it got produced. And so it's a matter of, it's always boiled down to play values, whether a game does well or not.
Right, as David Theil has pointed out, Reactor was more of a subtle game, and the things that 14-year-old boys like to do, which was blow things up and destroy things, you couldn't do that in Reactor. You had to play it more subtly, and that was part of the problem with Reactor. Kind of a rare game today, hard to get a hold of, and a very challenging game.
So going back to tie-ins, since we couldn't get Superman, and as I say, Columbia Pictures owned Milestar / Gottlieb at the time, they wanted our development team, not me, but Chris and Matt, to do a tie-in to what was going to be their competition for the mega hit Star Wars. They had a great idea that you would be talking about today, 35 years later. I'm sure you all know the game. It was fantastic, a major success. It was called Crawl. Anyone? Okay. You know, well, anyways, they were a great team. This is a great game. Unfortunately, Columbia, as all, I guess the marketing of any picture company thinks that every movie is going to be great, oversold the concept that it was going to be a Star Wars, which it never was. And so they had us develop new tie-in scenes that tie into the movie, which in order to understand the scenes, you're going to have to see the movie if you can find it on DVD or anything. But
Or you can see it in the remake. We understand there's going to be a remake of Crawl. So maybe a remake of this game.
well, at least drive you to watch the game. But again, I think it won't have the success of a Star Wars, even when you consider the last three. But I'm sure that Matt and Chris were not thrilled that they spent an incredible amount of effort making a great game, only to be tied to the dog of the movie. On a matter of tie-in, the Three Stooges game, Columbia owns Three Stooges, and Sam Russo rightly thought that we should do a tie-in to this game. And part of the fun was that back then there was no ability to digitize voice like it is now. We had to redesign our soundboard to sort of digitize human speech, and it was a thrill to actually meet the authorized voice man for the Three Stooges. He could do all three voices. We were in an audio studio with our hardware guy and working diligently to get his voice recorded in the rather primitive digitizing. And again, this is as a tie-in game, I think this would be a dynamite iPhone game or something, because I mean it is our classic comic heroes, and it's a fun game.
And then David, if you could just tell the audience here, who anxiously awaiting any anecdotes you have to tell us about the sounds for artists.
Well, one of the anecdotes is there was a place in the game where characters were tossed into the buildings, and then the buildings got ka-chunked, and building rubble fell down. And but with the system we had, sampling anything like that was impossible. We didn't have enough space to hold more than about 1.5 seconds of sound. So everything had to be some kind of algorithm that I wrote that made a sound. And making realistic sounds with an algorithm on a very underpowered system was challenging, to say the least. But I needed a model to work from, to make my best shot at trying to make rubble come off of a building. So I had moved my office by that point upstairs, and there was a balcony, like overlooking the warehouse where games were being assembled. And so I had Chris Brewer downstairs with some kind of cassette microphone, and I was upstairs and I was dropping bricks, trying to miss Chris, but hopefully close enough so he could record it. So then I would have a model of what I needed to do to have rubble. And that ended up as one of the comics in Tim's book. Shoot the robot, shoot mom, don't shoot the robot. Except he had it shooting a watermelon into a wall from a cannon. But it was that's was for that. Then I came up with something that sounded like it. And that was the part, if I remember, that was the chunk of code that Warren was helping on. I'm pretty sure that was, while Tom was working on gameplay, Warren was working on rubble falling off of the left and right sides of the buildings. Yeah?
Is that right? He doesn't remember.
I remember.
Yeah, it took 35 years.
Yeah. So, Reactor wasn't a commercial success, and I was finishing up Reactor and working on the second game, and it was still all very new to me and still very difficult. That soundboard was always difficult because it was very flexible but crazy hard to make a lot of sounds. So I worked very, very hard on this, and I'm sure as Tom was, crushed by its acceptance in the focus groups and in the arcade. It didn't test very well. And this was, the other anecdote was Argus, Video Man, Protector, Guardian was my first experience of a formally run focus group. We went to Mount Prospect, to the mall there, and kidnapped some kids and put them in a room with the game, and we were behind a silver glass so we could watch them, but they couldn't see us. And then a professional, it was Dave Birdie, I think.
Yeah, it would have been Dave.
Yeah, Dave was running this focus group, and we were trying to delve into the recesses of the player's brain, trying to figure out, what simple fix is there so we can get these people to really love the game. And they played it, and they played it. The consensus was that they hated the trackball. They wanted to join, and we were all in love with trackball at the time. A lot of games developed at Gottlieb that never saw the light of day were used to trackball. And eventually I came to terms with the fact that if you have a game like Reactor or Protector, where you move objects on the screen, but the objects can move back and alter your character, and you have no forced feedback to that the player just decides, wait, the trackball's busted, because I'm moving it this way, but the character got moved this way. And because there's no force there, they just kind of go, wait, the trackball's busted. Give me a joystick. Give me something, that works. And so, based on that focus group, there was a joystick version of the game that was tested, and I don't think it did any better, because that didn't make any sense. A trackball is always better at up, down, left, right positioning than a joystick would be, but that's what the kids wanted. So that's what they said they wanted. And so that was the first thing I learned from this was, never pay any attention to anything said in the focus group. It's a very expensive adventure in foolishness.
Thanks for reminding us of that. Bear that in mind. Do you still do focus groups for pins? No?
Nah. The great thing about coin op is one of the more democratic versions of product introduction. When you have an arcade, you just stick it there with no fanfare. You just put it out there, and then people will vote with their quarters. And people have some awareness of, oh, wait, I've never seen this before. So you get like one or two shots, and if you don't captivate them in about 3 minutes, well, then they go on to something they know they like. They'll go play Robotron. So, but it's you stand there invisible and watch them play, and it's a fantastic way to the success of your product. Then you can see, you can tell by body language, you can tell a lot of things by the way people play the game. You can see how they're crushing it because of some hole you left in the game design, or you can see their frustration in something that you thought was fair, but players never perceive that as fair. And so that's focus groups. You don't need focus groups. You just need arcades, and so still. To a lesser degree, I work in pinball now, and because pinball isn't operated by professional people that much, it's mostly collectors, less arcade testing is done. But still, on the current game that I'm finishing up, The Hobbit, they first put out half dozen machines, and they watch the coin reports, they keep track of every audit, they see which shots are being made and which shots aren't being made, and all that is way more real and useful than somebody in a white lab coat asking pointed questions. So no, focus group, nah.
Well, thanks a lot, David. Thanks for checking in with us. Always good to talk to you, and we look forward to the next occasion. discuss maybe some ongoing projects.
Well, I will be, for anybody who wants to say hello, I plan on flying into Chicago for Pinball Expo in October.
Okay, fantastic.
I may have up to 4 manufactured games at that show. It's the first time in my career where I've had 4 things show up at the same time. They're all being made. So, I'm excited. This 2016, this is my 10th anniversary as a contractor doing this, and I'm very happy.
Well, and as I mentioned before, Tom and I are working on a new game. We hope maybe you can do a few sounds for us, fit it in your schedule.
All right.
All right. Thanks again.
So, bye Tom, bye Mark, bye Jeff, bye Milwaukee.
That is a prototype that the Galloping Ghost put together in conjunction with one of our old colleagues, Dave Bonecutter, lent some of his technical expertise to get things going, but Doc found a Qbert board, and the chips, all that information came from me. Perhaps Doc would tell us a little bit about that process.
Hey everybody. And first off, I want to thank you two for making such a great game, and just coming with and meeting with your fans and everything. It's been an amazing experience to give people a game that they had never seen before. There were very few, I should say, because when we launched the game, there was somebody that had played it back in 1982 and it was their favorite game then. So it's absolutely amazing to see people enjoy this game now, and we really want to thank both of you and all 3 of you for making such an amazing game that unfortunately didn't come out. But
You might add that guy, the fellow Mike, he was like 14 back in that day, and now he's got the world high score because this is the only copy in the world to work on.
well, now we're able to track the scores on it. Again, Mike Vinicor was the one who had played it back in the day, and he came in and spent quite a bit of time that on his first game, which again probably hurt your quarter count.
Yeah, he's at like the 300,000 mark, and I think he's going to give it another try this weekend. He'll be here tomorrow, trying to break his own record.
It's great watching him play it, and it's a really cool game, and definitely thank you from everybody, because everybody really seems to be enjoying it after all these years, and it's again just spawned from a discussion that we haven't had in Wizard World, and just thank you for making so many great games back then and now.
Thanks for you and your crew for all the great work you did to bring this thing back to life.
Thank you. Thanks everybody.
And there you go. That was the Argus panel from the 2016 Midwest Gaming Classic at the Sheraton Hotel in Brookfield, Wisconsin. I'd like to thank Jeff Lee, Tom Malinowski, David Theil, and Doc Mac for coming together to get that game into development and finished after all these years. I've played it, and as you can see by the footage at the end of the panel, it is a special game. And basically, you can look at it as a shooter. And I mean, basically, that's what it is. It's kind of like the game Defender, if you really want to compare it to something else. Is it my cup of tea? It's okay. Would I play it again? I played it a couple times, and it's not one of my favorite games, but I think it holds a special place because it was actually prototyped to be set after the Superman movies that were out at the time with Christopher Reeve. So, it may not be my cup of tea, but it could be your cup of tea, and perhaps you could play it as well when you visit Galloping Ghost in Brookfield, Illinois, like I did. I have to say that Galloping Ghost is a pretty cool place. It is jam-packed from wall to wall with video games, and there's a lot there that I've never seen, and one of them was Argus, amongst many, many others. If you haven't taken a trip to Galloping Ghost in Brookfield, Illinois, do yourself a favor and do that. It is a special place. And that's it for this episode of the Midwest Gaming Classic podcast. Now, just a reminder, this was part one of a two-part series having to do with developers Jeff Lee and Tom Malinowski. Next week will be part two, and we'll be talking about the development of the very famous Q*bert arcade game. So, until next time, take care, stay safe, and game on.
When you decide to come out to this type of function, this type of experience, this type of gathering, Marvel phenomenon, there is only one event to attend, the Midwest Gaming Classic, where you and the games are one. Midwest Gaming Classic. It's not just child's play.